What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today we're talking college football DFS ahead of the conference championship main slate on Saturday. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by PrizePicks. In PrizePicks, they're a daily prop-based contest. You're making lineups with player props. You can add up to 5 of these props in one lineup. It's overs, unders, passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, you name it, they have it. And it's college football. You can mix and match those props with NFL, NHL, NBA. You think of it, they probably have it, and you can mix and match these in your lineups. And if you click the link in the video description below, make your first deposit. You'll get a match deposit bonus up to $100, first match deposit bonus up to $100, and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So make sure to check that out. Yeah, it's Thursday. We're recording the main slate, and FanDuel still doesn't have pricing out. So apologies there. Just think about the slate as if try to use the information if you're playing FanDuel as if their pricing's out. I don't know what to tell you, man. But DraftKings is out, so we're going to talk about them. We'll bring it over to the main slate, and it's an awesome slate of games for conference championship. A couple interesting wrinkles. We've got multiple start times. Normally, it's just the early window and then the afternoon window. The night window is included, so you have multiple times to potentially late swap. Keep your eye on that. And it's an interesting slate in terms of quarterbacks. There's not a lot of premier quarterback talent on the slate. And where there's some injuries we'll talk about too. So diving right in, we've got Kansas State on deck. They are taking on TCU. This is a rematch. And the spread is 2.5 points in favor of TCU. There is a 61.5 total here in favor of the undefeated team, that is TCU. Overall, both of these teams are actually fairly slow. You know, TCU, they rank 101st in pace. Excuse me, Kansas State ranks 101st in pace. TCU ranks 91st. And then in terms of pass rate, these are two fairly run-heavy teams. Kansas State has a 41.5% pass rate. TCU's at 45.5%. But looking at the first game here, it was fairly close overall. TCU wins 38-28, and yards per play was pretty comparable. Kansas State actually had the edge there, but they had 2 turnovers. So it's one of the closer games TCU played all year. I think hence the spread being pretty close. But biggest thing with Kansas State, that's where we'll start. Quarterback Adrian Martinez might return. We don't know. We'll have to watch it, and it might honestly come down to who's taking snaps pregame. Luckily, you'll have this information quickly. The offense changes a lot when Adrian's under center. They don't pass as much. They use him as a glorified running back there. I mean, he has 615 rush yards, and he's missed 2 games entirely. He's missed portions of others. He may have missed even another full game, I forget. But all this to say, he's missed multiple games, and they still use him a ton as a runner when he's out there. As a passer, he only averages 140 yards per game. A lot of that's noise. Again, like you leave games really early, which he did. That's going to affect your stats, but they still prefer to use him as a pure runner. Now, Will Howard, when he starts, the pass rate for Kansas State increases. Will Howard does not have the same skill set. They use him more as a pocket passer. His designed rush attempts, he has 10 in the last 3 games combined. So when he runs, a lot of it's coming via scrambles. And honestly, he doesn't even do that a lot. So this is either a traditional rush attack or pocket passing with Will Howard. With that said, he has shown the ability to run, so I don't think it's firmly out of the question. He's going to pick up something with his legs. Like, he's very rarely taking negative rushing yards. So if Will Howard ends up starting, I think it's okay. And I actually kind of prefer Will Howard to Adrian Martinez. And that's a price thing. It's not a talent thing. Like, I would rather play Will Howard at 6,300 than Adrian at 7,100 just to save the salary and then potentially use that somewhere else. Because we'll talk about some studs in the slate. That 800 you potentially save does go somewhere. But the real player we want to get to, I think, is Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn is also a little bit better with Will Howard under center. He's just not cannibalized as much by Adrian Martinez. He's, ridiculous in terms of touches. Last 3 games, 35 touches, 23 touches, and 29 touches for Deuce Vaughn. Just too cheap, especially if Will Howard plays. He's averaging well over 100 yards per game on the ground, nearly 30 yards per game through the air. Deuce Vaughn is electric. And there are some short slates. So DJ Giddens does touch the ball a fair amount too as a change of pace, just because their run rate's really high. So Giddens maybe have some short slates, some showdowns you could look at. Receiving game, not a ton of interest here. It's a shorter slate, so maybe you get some stacks of Kansas State if Howard's under center. Malik Knowles and Phillip Brooks each average about 5 targets per game. Neither of them are particularly explosive. Knowles at 56 yards per game, Brooks at 42, and then wide receiver 3, Cade Warner's at 32. They're all pretty efficiently priced. I think Brooks is my favorite from a price-adjusted perspective, but I don't feel good about it, and these guys aren't priorities. They're going to be more dart throws in larger tournaments. Benson Noah is basically their every down tight end at this point. Sammy Wheeler mixes in on occasion here, but it's actually pretty consistent. What Kansas State does is a passing attack. In the last game, you had Ben Sano 100% of the routes, and then anytime Sammy Wheeler came on the field, it was at the expense of a receiver. As you can see, Sano very clearly involved. Cheap, but I don't think the preferred value. Viable, but yeah. TCU, again, slower, run heavier, but efficient, very efficient. Duggan has 294 rush yards in the year, which is great, and then he averages 256 as a passer. Again, still somewhat depressed. He didn't start the year for this team. So Duggan, a lot of upside with him always. He only throws the ball about 28 times per game, but a couple things work in his favor here. We're projecting to get Tay Barber and Quentin Johnson back this game, which should only help Duggan, and he's been fine without them. And then what he does as a rusher, it should give you a good floor. So Duggan, he's kind of a good floor combo here. He does have a ceiling, but just doesn't reach it quite as much as some other plays. The reason we might be getting to Duggan more than some of these other quarterbacks is just lack of alternatives, and you'll understand that as we get more through the slates. I think Duggan could be popular depending on how some of these injuries shake out. Kendry Miller is electric. Didn't even really need to use him in their last game. Averages 105 rush yards per game. Good pass catcher when they need to use him in that capacity, which isn't very often. So Kendry, he's another one of these guys that when the chips are down, you'll see a ton of work. Their fourth and third most recent game, he had 24 and 23 touches since then, just outside 20 touches in both, but they've had the ability to kind of ease off the gas with him. And he did get banged up in their second most recent game, but I think he's fine. Receiving game, Johnston, you're just kind of betting on the ankle being fine now. There were some quotes from Dyke saying this is the healthiest he's looked in the last month, which is crazy to say because he's been in and out of games, but ultimately that says to me he's going to play, and he's cheaper than he has been. So 6,500 for Quentin Johnson. Very, very good tournament play. Not sure cash games I'll get there, but tournaments love Quentin Johnston. And these guys should all be healthy now. So Darius Davis, he returned from injury, 5 targets. Savion Williams, 5 targets. They both play a lot already. Tay Barber projects to return here as well. He is second on the team in receiving, so very efficient is Tay Barber. And that should kind of take out all of these other noisy pass catchers we've seen getting targets, like Jordan Hudson, Jarquarius Spivey, Gunnar Henderson. I think these are the players that are now cannibalized because TCU projects to be fully healthy in the receiver room. So I don't think we want to get to any of the really, really cheap plays here for TCU, but we'll see. We'll see who plays. I don't think so, though. Next game, we've got Toledo taking on Ohio for the MAC championship. This game is a 2-point spread. It is in favor of Toledo, and it's played indoors. So the total is up at 55, taking some money there. They played at Ford Field, if I'm not mistaken. Toledo is a team 21st in pace. They have a 46.5% pass rate. Big question here is the status of their quarterback, DeQuan Finn. He tried to return in their most recent game, had to exit, and was seen after the game in a boot, which he had been in the week before. So very big question here for Toledo. And he also didn't have any designed rush attempts. He only has 6 designed rush attempts in the last 3 games. He hasn't played in most of those, but that is a big, big issue for DeQuan Finn here. And personally, I don't think he plays, but this is just me reading the tea leaves. We'll have to see. On the year, if he does play, 522 rush yards. He averages just shy of 200 as a passer, 197.5 on 27 attempts. Benefits from that up-tempo run-heavy attack because he's so mobile. But when Tucker Gleason came in, it was actually pretty solid. Like Tucker Gleason, 185 rush yards. Most of that has come in the last 3 games. And then he's averaging 104 as a passer. But again, he's situationally appeared in games. Tucker Gleason actually is a pretty good stat line. In those 3 games, he's played a lot. He's viable. He's mobile. Ohio's defense doesn't scare you. 6K Tucker Gleason. I have a lot of interest in him if he ends up being the starter here, especially because people generally, the public that is, don't play these MAC guys. They don't know them. This is a quarterback injury situation, so you're going to have late news likely. There's a decent chance I play some Gleason. The backfield, and here's another thing, like you're going to get poor reporting. Maybe because it's the championship, it'll be better, but you never know what you're getting with the MAC. And on that note, Micah Kelly didn't play in their last game. No news of it. He had carried the ball 17 and 16 times in the 2 weeks prior. I played a lot of him, so just ate the stone zero in many lineups, but we don't know. His status has not been updated. If he plays, it's a three-way committee. If he's out, it's just Jock Stewart and Penny Boone, and it's ebbed and flowed all year long. On the season, Penny Boone has the most touches at 125. Jock Stewart's at 119. Micah Kelly's at 114. But in the most recent game, Penny Boone outtouched Jock Stewart, outcarried, I guess I should say, 15-3. The weeks prior was Micah Kelly in the lead. And then to begin the year, Jock Stewart had a pretty commanding lead on the backfield. So it's ebbed and it's flowed. And to be honest, the most efficient back has been Jock Stewart. He has 565 rush yards to Penny Boone's 411. And again, Penny Boone has outcarried him. So the efficiency is not even close. If I'm throwing a dart right now, it's probably still Jock Stewart, but I don't feel good about any of the Toledo backs. These are firmly like large field GPP mix and match because Ohio's defense is bad. One of them probably is a good game, just not sure which one it is. Receiving game, it's changed a lot for this team. And Jerwan Newton's the only one playing a full-time role in this Toledo offense, which is crazy to say because Devin Maddox, he had the 10 targets last week, but the role still was not very consistent. And he's bounced around a little bit in terms of targets this year. But it was crazy to me. I went on the back end and I looked, 10 targets. He only participated in 49% of the routes. Jerwan Newton was at 96%. Only 2 targets for Newton, but man, you can get Newton at a cheaper price than Maddox, and he literally doubled him up in routes. I don't think I'm going to be buying the Maddox hype. There's always a chance he plays more because it was a good game, but Newton has been consistent. He's been at 90+% of the routes in 7 of his last 8 games. And the game he wasn't was a 73% route share. The last 3 games for Maddox, he's at a route share of 38%, 66%, and 49%. It's just volatile. And then from there, it's a pure rotation. Demir Blankhamsey, last week, 47% of the routes. Michael Barkley, he came in at 47%. Thomas Zeros, 35%. The next most consistent player is their tight end, Jamal Turner. He's at least been above 60% of the routes in 8 straight games, but the target volume is not great for him. 4.2K is also a pretty penny. I think the guy we'll be focusing on here is Jerwan Newton for the consistency, but maybe gamble a little bit on Maddox because of that volume and his ability. He should be played more. I don't know why they're not using him. Ohio, 109th in pace, 48% pass rate. Would expect this to drop. Curtis Rourke tore his ACL, unfortunately. Just a shame. The best quarterback in this conference. And it's probably going to affect him next year, too, because the injury was so late. With him out, they moved to CJ Harris. Very mobile quarterback. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, but I'm still a little hesitant to completely buy into CJ Harris, especially going up against the best defense in the MAC. It's tough. We know he's mobile. As a passer, he completed less than 50% of his passes. So it's very dicey. Like, you're dealing with a new starting quarterback. They do have a week to prepare here, extra time to get him ready and up to speed. But man, very, very difficult to trust. I'll read you his stats. I'm trying to pull them up. Don't have all these up right away. In that game against Bowling Green, he rushed for 3 scores and 65 yards on 12 carries. And then again, completed 10 of 21 passes for 196 yards in the score. Very volatile against Toledo. I may end up with some, but I think in a vacuum, I prefer Tucker Gleason. The backfield, Saya Bangura has had a monstrous role. And you look at his yardage, it's 88 yards per game on the ground. Through the air, 18 yards per game. But recently, they've just handed him the keys to the offense. And some of that due to injury. They had Nolan McCormick banged up for a while. They've been using Jake Netherton as a change of pace back. But last 3 games for Bangura, 23 touches, 24 touches, and 28 touches. They're slight underdogs here. So on the year, he averages 20.5 touches per game. Toledo plays good defense again. I don't think he's like a cash lock or anything, but Bangura, very good GPP play on this slate. And then the receivers, it's pretty condensed here. You have Wig Lutz. He's the target leader on the year. Only 2 targets last week, but still averages 7.3 per game, 69 yards. And the big thing with Wig Lutz, the routes weren't really affected. So I'm not concerned. 95% route rate for Wig Lutz. He's going to be right where we usually get him. And then Miles Cross came back from injury, played really his normal role. 73% of the routes for Cross is excellent. 3 targets. So I'm not really concerned with that as well. I think better days are ahead for Cross. He's second on the team in targets. 4th on the team in yards. So the only thing is he's kind of targeted more around the line of scrimmage. From there, Jacoby Jones, 68% of the routes, pretty consistent with him. And James Bostic, he came in at 59%. That was pretty far below where we'd seen him. He had been at 75% in 4 straight games. But ultimately, there's going to be a little bit of ebbs and flows behind Wiglets. He's the only guy that's locked into the routes on every single play. I think once you get behind him, Cross and Jones and Bostic are all viable, but volatile, I guess I should say. Viable, but volatile. And my preference is Wiglets 1, Cross 2, Bostic 3, Jones 4 in terms of price-adjusted values. They rotate tight ends. Don't worry about that. Next game, we have the Sun Belt Championship. Coastal Carolina takes on Troy. 8.5-point spread in favor of Troy. 49 total. So for the 3rd consecutive game, we have a massive quarterback injury. It is Grayson McCall, questionable here. He is dealing with a lower body injury that he suffered 4 weeks ago, and his initial rehabilitation time was pegged 3 to 6 weeks. So he's in the window, but he's a little early in the window. He's questionable. We will see. Offense is horrific without him, so they need him. 122nd in pace, 41.5% pass rate. They may go even run heavier without him. For the beginning part, we'll talk about it as if he's active. 165 rush yards for McCall. That's not like he's shown much more upside in the past, but with the injury, I don't think we see it here. Hyper efficient, though, 257 yards per game on just 27 attempts. Troy plays good defense, but I don't think it matters against McCall. He's done this against some of the best competition that he's faced all season long. And if he doesn't play, I have no interest in Guest or Carpenter. They split time. Guest is a pocket passing type quarterback who isn't efficient whatsoever. Carpenter never throws. He's out there just as a glorified running back. Use a lot of wildcat stuff with him, that like speed option stuff Coastal likes to run. But honestly, I think I might X out the entire Coastal team if Grayson McCall is out. David Sherritt running back. CJ Beasley and Reese White are the top 2 guys. But they now return Braden Bennett from injury. So there's a 3rd guy in the mix. And they also use a couple other situational pieces here. So Braden Bennett returning, I don't think is good. Aaron Bedgood plays a bit in the backfield. Very difficult to trust any Coastal Carolina back. If I had to play one, it's probably Beasley. Don't feel good about it and probably not going to do it. In the receiving game, McCall is so impactful for these players. If McCall is in, Pinckney and Jared Brown are both good values. If he's out, it's a disaster. It's essentially these 3 players on the field every single play or close to it. Pinckney being the actual number 1 receiver. Jared Brown is a dynamic freshman for this team. He gets a lot of carries too. He actually has 20 carries on the season, but he's coming off an injury. In that 2-target game in the second most recent performance, if you're watching on video, he only had 2 targets in their second most recent contest. He got hurt in the game, and then he returned last week. Only 3 targets and no carries, which is very, very unlike him. But his routes were still fine, so I'm not worried about Brown. I think you can buy low, assuming McCall plays. And then Tyson Mobley is their wide receiver 3. He's viable as a deeper play in the offense. He's not a good price-adjusted play at 5,500, but he's at least viable. Tight end is a bit of a rotation for them, but they do use Xavier Gravett more than any other tight end. So, again, not a good price-adjusted play, but just a very deep sleeper option maybe. Troy, they are 103rd in pace. They have a 47% pass rate. And this is the team that's favored. A lot of line movement here. And if McCall's out, they're going to be favored by even more. Their quarterback has been a bit of a rotation all year, but last week they used Gunnar Watson and only Watson. Jared Deggy and Watson are essentially the same player. Both fairly efficient passers, but non-existent mobility. So the thing with Watson is he absolutely needs a 300-yard bonus to overcome his negative rushing, which probably isn't likely here. 49 total is very bad. Coastal's defense is horrific, so at least the door is open for it, but he's not very high on the quarterback priority list because of that negative rushing numbers that really prevents him from getting to a ceiling in terms of upside. Sorry, mail just came. Next one, running game. They have a high volume rushing attack here, and it starts with Kamani Vidal. 5,700 is flat out too cheap for Vidal. Right now, in the last couple games, his volume has been absurd. Over the last 2 games, he has touch counts of 29 and 34. Coastal has a terrible defense, and Troy's now an 8.5-point favorite. And when we had less clarity on McCall, he got the questionable tag earlier this week. When most people thought he was out, this was north of 10. Vidal has an excellent role, and I think he's going to be semi-popular for a good reason. Decent pass catcher here. He has 27 targets. I think you can use him with confidence. Billingsley is a nice GPP option. Earlier in the year, this was closer to a 50-50 split. It's sort of gotten away from that, but Billingsley still has touch counts, I guess carry counts of 10 and 9 in the last 2 games. Doesn't look like any targets for Billingsley in that span, but GPP option in larger slates or showdowns. The receiving game, it's a bit difficult to evaluate. Tez Johnson's their alpha. That's clear. 8.8 targets per game over the last 4, 69 yards per game for Tez Johnson. But then it's kind of been a rotation and not so much just week in, week out, but we've seen different players pop up for bigger target shares. The most recent game, it was Tez at 74% of the routes, Deshaun Stoudemire at 80%, and Rajay Johnson at 89%. And recently, Rajay has been playing a little bit more than Stoudemire. He's received more routes than Stoudemire in 6 straight games. So I think he's still the clear play. He is more expensive, but we're talking about 2 kind of punt options here. But Stoudemire, don't be worried about the 0 target game in their last contest. He was out there for 80% of the routes, so better days are ahead. And if you flat out need to punt, I think he's fine. Jabre Barber's injured, so I don't think we see him return. It is what it is. Tight ends rotation, they use DeYoungkria Lewis as the main guy, but just about 50% of the routes for him. He'll split time with Michael Weiss and Clayton. Olendick, no interest there. So Taz 1, Rajay Johnson 2, Deshaun Stoudemire 3 for me. SEC Championship, it's LSU taking on Georgia, 17.5 point spread, 51.5 total. Another game, another quarterback injury. Surprise, surprise. Jaden Daniels is in a walking boot. One thing I'll say here is this has happened before, and it was precautionary. So it appears to be precautionary here, but what do I know? We'll know pregame if he's moving around well or not. But again, this did happen earlier this season when Daniels reportedly suffered an ankle sprain and was fine. So LSU 61st in pace, 48% pass rate. Like Coastal, their entire offense depends on Jaden Daniels. Their implied team total 17, which isn't good to begin with. But Daniels, he's so mobile that there is a decent chance he puts up a usable score, even if he's, like dealing with the low total here facing Georgia. He can still be serviceable for DFS with his legs. 824 rush yards, averages 214 as a passer on 29 attempts per game. So very much relying on that mobility. In the run game, Armani Goodwin out for the year. Josh Williams hasn't played in 2 straight games, but I think they were saving him for this game. He's been suited up, so I think we see him return. It's a split. Without him, it's Noah Cain, slightly ahead of John Emery at this point. If Josh Williams returns, I think it's full-blown 3-way committee, not usable here. Receiving game, Malik Neighbors and Kayshon Boutte are the 2 leaders in the pass game. Neighbors has worked ahead of Boutte, and I think that is why you see the price difference, and it makes sense. Very little to see here in terms of routes at the top. These guys are efficiently priced. 86% of the route for Neighbors, 84 for Boutte, just is what it is. The next most consistent player is actually tight end Mason Taylor. 93% route rate last week, but only 3 targets. He's just not a focal point of the offense. And then behind them, looks like Jere Jenkins has moved ahead of the Brian Thomases, the Kyron Lacey's, the Jack Becks. None of those players were above 40% of the routes, but Jenkins came in at 66. So GPP Jenkins, I think, could make some sense here if you want to, but I certainly would rather get up to Neighbors and Boutte. For Georgia, 113th in pace, 47% pass rate, but this is an explosive offense. Stetson Bennett, kind of like by default, is one of the quarterbacks we should be considering. And at this point, you probably see why. There's just so many injuries that Bennett's a consistent player that's going to get you points. The rest of them, they injured, they not. Risk of re-injury, we don't know. Bennett has 190 rush yards on the year. He averages 263 as a passer on 30.5 attempts, which is pretty solid. The backfield's full four-way committee, full-blown committee at this point. Kenny McIntosh leads. He's also the pass-catching back, so he's the priority, but he's 6,500. Like, I would rather just play Troy's Vidal specifically and straight up over Kenny McIntosh, but GPP viable. Dywan Edwards is second in the rushing order. Kendall Milton, I think, will be third coming off an injury. And Branson Robinson fourth. But again, you'll see all 4. Receiving game, Brock Bowers. He is the leader here. It looks like I might have accidentally left out Ladd McConkey. That is a big error on my part. So excuse me, with to talk about them in conjunction, because Ladd should be on this list. Looks like I just accidentally left him off. Anyway, Ladd McConkey, he's right up there with Bowers. These are the top 2 options. They're very close in price, both in the 6Ks. Route rates will be above 90% for both when the going gets tough. So I think they're both fine GPP options, and they're probably going to project a little better on this slate than they typically do, just with Georgia's total. And behind them, The next most active pass catchers are Darnell Washington and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. Darnell Washington, he's just involved a ton in 12 personnel. Last week, he had a 64% route rate. That's with Bowers at 91%. So you can see how much they use 12. And then Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, 55%. He's going to be in that range. Dylan Bell was at 36. Kearse Jackson, 18. Pretty gross behind them. One wrinkle is they project to return A.D. Mitchell maybe this week. We haven't seen him in a long time, but even if he returns, I don't think he jumps any of the players we mentioned. Bowers and Ladd, top two options. And then Darnell and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint are your cheap price-adjusted options for tournaments. UCF Tulane rematch in the AAC championship. Tulane, the home team here, they get to play at home. 4-point spread in favor of Tulane, 57 total. UCF will start there, 38th in pace, 43% pass rate, thereabouts. John Rice Plumlee got injured in their last game, and he got pulled from the game. It is one of the many times he sustained a hamstring injury this year, and he's been banged up for weeks now. With Plumlee, we need the mobility. That is key. And we don't even know if he's going to play here. On the year, he has 848 rush yards, and he averages 200 as a passer. He's actually been pretty efficient, but erratic. Tons of turnovers with Plumlee. If he plays and we get firm confirmation he's starting, he's a good play in DFS off the mobility. He torched Tulane in the first game, 176 rushing yards. The problem is we just don't know how healthy he is. It is a hamstring injury, so he could play and be non-effective. In their last game, he had 6 design rush attempts, which is a huge issue. The week prior, he had 0. I believe that was the Navy game. Just unbelievably little rushing production from Plumlee of late. There's a chance he plays and isn't effective because of this injury. There's also a chance they start Mikey Keene, who I have almost no interest in at the price. Pure pocket passer, cannot run. Actually has negative rushing yards in the year, negative 13. Somewhat efficient, and it's kind of just on the back of his awesome pass catchers. But Tulane's defense and their defensive strength is the pass defense. That does not work in Keene's favor, so I don't have a lot of interest in him. The backfield still a split between Isaiah Bowser, RJ Harvey. Just makes very little sense here. RJ Harvey has outgained Bowser, 727 to 671. Their rush attempts, Bowser's at 175, RJ Harvey at 105. Gus Malzahn just can't evaluate his player personnel, but that doesn't matter for DFS. We just care who gets the ball. And right now, Bowser's still slightly ahead of Harvey. From a raw price-adjusted standpoint, I would still rather get to the cheaper RJ Harvey because it's almost a 50-50 committee. So play the cheaper, more efficient guy. Unless it's just large field, then you could play Bowser's, maybe a leverage guy. The receiving game is pretty consistent. Same 4 guys in the field all the time. Ryan O'Keefe, Javon Baker, and Kobe Hudson round out the receivers. Strong preference towards Ryan O'Keefe and Javon Baker. They've just been way more involved and way more efficient. They each average 59 yards per game. O'Keefe, 8 targets per game. Baker, 7.2. Hudson kind of started the year banged up and didn't play much, but he's playing more now, but he's still only averaging 4 targets per game over the last 4. Both Baker and O'Keefe are above 8. So just, I don't see any real reason to play much Hudson outside of leverage if you think he's going to be low owned. Among the tight ends, Alec Holler has been the most involved here. They will rotate at times, but his route rate was still only 63%. They use other tight ends. They use Zach Marsh-Wolgen at times. Keymore Gamble when he's healthy. I don't think he plays, but all that to say, they don't just lock in a tight end. Tulane, 80th in pace, 41.5% pass rate, thereabouts. They're a very run-heavy team, and they have an awesome signal caller, Michael Pratt. He's kind of in the game manager category, but he's mobile with 347 rush yards. He's very efficient as a passer, 216 yards per game on 26 attempts. They just don't ask him to do a lot. So Pratt, I think, is a low, I guess I should say high floor, low ceiling type guy, but there is some upside here with the ground game. And he has shown good passing attack volume as well at times. So I don't want to just rule him out, but I think he's more of like your high floor, low ceiling option. The backfield, we've been saying this for a while. Don't question Tajay Spears' volume when the games are close. They're going to lean on Spears. 35 carries for Spears in the last game when the chips were down. That is ridiculous. 1 target as well. When they're blowing out teams, he's going to see 15 carries when they need him. They need to win games. You're going to see more than 20, and that's what we saw last week. It's what we saw against the first UCF matchup. I'm not worried about Spears. 98.5 rush yards per game. He's a good receiver. He averages another 19.5 there. And we know there's a lot of upside for volume when games are competitive. The receiving game, Day-Day McDougal is off the team. So this is actually condensed routes for them. Normally, I don't really play a lot of Tulane receivers, but I think you could. Shea Wyatt, his role is just monstrous right now. 96% of the routes, at least 90% in 2 straight games. Shea Wyatt is on the field almost every single play, and it hasn't resulted in like a locked-in target share, but he's the guy I want to play if I'm playing someone. Second is going to be Deuce Watts. He leads the team in targets, albeit slightly. Not very efficient on them either, but he's still second. Third for me is going to be Jaquan Jackson at 3,200. He's actually third on the team in total receiving yards. And there's not very much difference once you get behind Shea Wyatt in routes like Deuce Watts, Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson all rotate a bit. Even Tyreek James, their tight end. The thing is, McDougal being gone has consolidated it a bit for these players. So I think taking shots here makes a little bit more sense than it typically does. Still not a preferred play, but I don't want to X these guys out like I have in the past. Mountain West Championship, we've got Fresno taking on Boise, 3-point spread, 54 total. This game is going to be, I think, maybe a little more competitive than people think and a little more exciting than people think. Both teams are slow. Fresno's 83rd in pace. Boise's 100th. They play opposite styles. Fresno, 52% pass rate. Boise's at 42. And these teams played already, but Jake Haener missed the game, so it's very hard to glean anything from it. Logan Fife is atrocious. But Jake Haener's not. He's actually awesome. The problem with playing Jake Haener is the sacks. He is negative 94 rush yards on the year. So he is dependent on 300-yard bonuses. Fortunately, he averages 1 per game, 304.5 pass yards per game on 36.5 attempts. Haener's awesome, and Boise's defense looks great on paper, but this team just beats up on nothing but the cupcakes. Look at their recent schedule, and you'll see they're playing just horrific teams. And they've actually been gashed when they've stepped up in competition. BYU annihilated this Boise defense. All that to say, I think there's some upside for Haener in tournaments. Just the sacks, man. Very concerned with the sacks. The backfield, Jordan Mims leads the way. He has over 1,000 yards rushing this year, 90 yards on the ground per game. Decent pass catcher is Jordan Mims. 22 targets. That's fine for him. He's going to be contrarian because he's expensive and they're underdogs, and Boise has a good run defense on paper, but I think he should be in your tournament pool. Who you really want to play, I think, is Jalen Cropper and Nico Remigio. Cropper is the safer play. He's the player with the locked-in routes, 82 yards per game, 8.3 targets per game. He's just shy of 1,000 on the year. Remigio's been good too, but his routes are volatile, and he's benefited from injuries. Some of those route share games where you see him up at 100% or like 75+%, injuries have been a factor. Last week, he was down at 62%. He actually ran the same amount of routes as Zane Pope. They had the same amount of targets as well. I don't think Remigio should be 300 cheaper than Cropper. Remigio should be like 6K. So he's a bit more expensive than I like. I'm just finding the 300 for Cropper or going down for Pope. You could also look at some other ancillary guys. Eric Brooks, 38% of the routes. Not great. Mac Delana, 38%, not great. Maybe some services will have Raymond Powell's out of this game. He's a guy to watch because he declared for the draft, but after he did that, some places projected him out, and then he played 59%. So I don't think it's like, oh, I'm opting out of the team. I'm not playing anymore. I'm going to the draft. I just think he's just telling people his intentions and finishing the season. So I expect Powell's to play. Don't love him as a DFS option, but I don't think he misses the game. Boise mentioned their run heaviness. Fresno's defense is not good, and they're very bad at stopping the run. Taylon Green is hyper efficient as a rusher. They don't always ask him to do it, which is a concern. 437 rush yards on the year. He averages 191 as a passer. A little bit of noise there because Hank Bachmeier started the year as the starter. But last 4 games, Taylon Green has 20 designed rush attempts that maxed out at 10 in their second most recent contest. He only had 5 in the last game. And he also put up an awesome game rushing last week. So we got pretty lucky if you played Taylon Green. I certainly did, but willing to admit the luck that I received. We'll see. The coaching staff hasn't been consistent with the way they deploy their rushers. Taylon Green at times will rush for double-digit carries. Last week, Kalani and Genty were almost 50-50, but game script certainly played a role. I think Kalani is still the best bet for lead back carries. He's averaging 20.5 opportunities per game, but he's just horribly inefficient. 96 yards per game, just over 3 yards per carry. He's not great for Kalani, but the volume's there, so he should be in play. He's just expensive. Also, Genty is not a terrible play. He's now averaging 11.1 touches per game. when the chips are down, his touches decline and Halani's increase. So that's a concern in this spot. Very competitive game. Maybe we see less Genty, more Halani. I think they're both in your GPP pool. At receiver, Stephen Cobbs didn't play last week. So their 3 receiver sets, well, no matter what, Latrell Caples and Billy Bowens, are in there. But then if he plays, you're going to see Stephen Cobbs in there as well. If he doesn't play, it's going to change things a bit. Last week, we had Eric McAllister at 46% of the routes, Davis Cutter at 63%. Those are going to be the 2 main guys that take over. Tight ends are rotation. I don't want a lot of players there. So to rank them, number 1, still going to be Caples. 2 is Cobbs. 3 is Bowens. They're all expensive. Too expensive for me. If Cobbs misses the game, I would probably rank Cutter the next man up, just because the routes were better than McAllister's. The price is better than McAllister's, and it's a 1-game sample. So McAllister out targeting him 5-2 doesn't mean a lot to me. But I don't like those guys very much at all. Last couple games, we got the Big Ten Championship, another massive spread, 17 points in favor of Michigan, 52 total. Purdue is very fast and passively. They're 52nd in pace, 58% pass rate. Aiden O'Connell's been away from the team on very unfortunate circumstance, but he had the death of his brother, and he says he's going to play, which props to him, man. Never want to talk about these off-the-field issues when they concern the death of a loved one or a family member. But from a football perspective, Aiden O'Connell takes a lot of sacks, negative 45 rush yards this year. It's actually not as bad as some of the previous years for him. He averages 283 as a passer. We like to target O'Connell when he's playing teams like Indiana or whoever it may be, where the defense is pretty soft. They have a good total, so the pass attempts he can really capitalize on, because this is an underneath dink and dunk offense. When they play Michigan and when they play good defenses and they have implied team totals below 20, just makes it so much less likely that O'Connell 300-yard bonuses and pays off the salary tag. So he's cheap. I think he can be in your tournament builds, but don't love him as a play. The backfield, Devin Maccabee returned. They don't really have a lot of interest in giving work to anyone else. Dylan Downing, 1 carry. Kobe Lewis, no carries. King Dover, not expected to return. So Maccabee is your contrarian, heavy underdog, but bell cow usage back. Charlie Jones, I think, is playable no matter what. Averages 11.6 targets per game. Averages 99.9 receiving yards. He's played good teams. Doesn't matter. Teams can dedicate coverage to them. They just target Charlie Jones insanely. So he's playable no matter what. Their number 2 pass catcher is actually tight end Payne Durham. Decent price adjusted value on Durham. 7 targets last week, averages 6.3 on the year. Behind him, it is pretty dicey to target these Purdue pass catchers. First of all, they're not consistent. They'll change their routes around on a week-to-week basis. Last week, you saw TJ Sheffield at 88%. He hadn't eclipsed 70 since week 4. So that was a pretty big jump for him, which we haven't seen very often. And outside of that, their next most consistent route getter was Maccabee at running back, Paul Piferi at tight end, 50%. The next closest receiver was Deion Burks at 36. So it's really just Charlie Jones, Payne Durham, Sheffield kind of for consistent pass catchers, and nobody else on the field. So that's the way it stands. Michigan, 123rd in pace, 39% pass rate. JJ McCarthy would project so much better if they just increase their pass rate even a little bit. But man, I think people are going to play him just because price. There's barely any good signal callers on the slate. Like, I think a lot of people are going to be deciding between the uncertainty with Tucker Gleason and like the certainty but low upside of JJ McCarthy. Man, I don't know. It is tough to decide it, but quarterbacks are rough. It's a rough slate for QB, but McCarthy's mobile, 240 yards, only averages 185 as a passer. Purdue's defense doesn't scare you, but man, McCarthy, I'm just really worried about ceiling for him in tournaments. Running back, just kind of got to read the tea leaves throughout the week. Blake Corum, if he's active and healthy and full go, he's awesome and a great play. If he doesn't play, or even if he suits up and is limited, which is a very strong possibility here, Donovan Edwards becomes like one of the best plays in the slate. 22 carries last week, 2 targets. Playing with a cast on his hand didn't matter. Just full beast mode for Edwards. And he's healthy. At least we know healthy enough to carry this kind of workload. So I'll be watching this closely. I like Corum. I will play him if he's full go. If not, I'll be looking to Edwards a ton here. The receiving game, don't think they need to use him quite as much as last week. And even last week's volume, Cornelius Johnson, incredibly lucky to have the game he had. 5 targets for Cornelius. Ridiculous. Anyway, the target pecking order is Ronnie Bell 1, Cornelius 2, Roman Wilson 3. Certainly prefer the former to Bell and Johnson. Tight end Luke Schoonmaker, only about 30% of the routes, tried to play, couldn't give it a full go. So Colson Loveland, about 70% of the routes. Another one just to watch closely. Schoonmaker is the better tight end of the two, and he's 3,300. He'll pop if we give him a full route share. Just got to read the tea leaves on Schoonmaker throughout the week. Final game, ACC Championship, one of the better ones for DFS. You just got to wait all night. But if you play a signal caller in this game, you should have a lot of information. Clemson, 7.5-point favorite, 63.5 total. Clemson, 55th in pace, 45.5% pass rate. I think there's a pretty good chance this isn't even close to this pass rate with what DJ Uiagalelei has done recently. He's going to start the game. If he plays poorly, I think he's at risk of benching, but I also don't think they want to change the offense here in a game that is actually impactful for them. It's not impactful for playoff, but they want to win. So Uiagalelei, I think, plays most of it. He's going to get a ton of designed rush attempts. He's been double-digit designed rush attempts the last 2 games. I think there's a chance he goes under-owned because his poor play has really cost some people, but UNC's defense is horrible. Anyone can get it done against them. Zach Gibson for Georgia Tech average over 8 yards per attempt. So Uiagalelei is a good buy low, in my opinion. I think he's semi-cash viable. Just if you could guarantee me plays the snaps, I would play him in cash probably, but we don't have that information. Backfield, Will Shipley leads it, but Phil Maffa is involved, and Kobe Pace is back, just getting a touch or two here and there. It's mostly Shipley, then Maffa, then Pace. I think Shipley's a good price-adjusted play based on the matchup, and the implied total for Clemson is awesome here. He's also hyper efficient. Love Shipley. Receiving game, basically just Antonio Williams and pass. Bo Collins did return to their last game. He's not going to play here. He needs surgery. Tried to gut through it to give Clemson a chance to get to the playoff. They failed. So now he's just going to have the surgery. Antonio Williams is the only one that has a locked-in route share and target share. Like Nada, he did see his routes jump to 80% last week, but only 4 targets. Williams, their freshman, very locked-in target share, 93% of the routes. He's rock solid. And outside of these two, the next most consistent route getters, Davis Allen, tight end, 50%. Will Shipley, running back, 50%. Jake Brenningstool, 43. EJ Williams, 46. Just there's nothing consistent behind Joseph Nada and Antonio Williams. I think those are the focus points. UNC, 14th in pace, 53% pass rate. We finally get to the elite signal caller, Drake May. Had a couple of down games here. I'm not concerned. Tough matchup for May on paper, but he's beaten up on better. 629 rush yards for him. Averages 318.3 as a passer. I will gladly buy low on May if the ownership is lower. He's just the most consistent combination of talent, volume, efficiency, and good game environment here. So May, don't play him if you don't want to. I gladly will. Backfield, Elijah Green's the guy here. We haven't seen Caleb Hood injured. DJ Jones, haven't seen him lately. It's basically just been the Elijah Green show and Omarion Hampton taking on change of pace duties. Last week, Green had 24 carries, 4 targets. That's 28 touches. If he sees that volume, he's a good GPP play, just very hard to project because the week prior, he had 13 touches. So he went from, here's his last 4 games. Elijah Green, 23 touches, 21 touches, 13 touches, 28 touches. Decent GPP play, I'll say that. And last but not least, the UNC receiving game. Downs, their alpha, 13 targets in the last game. He's averaging 10.5 targets per game, 93 yards. And Antoine Green averages 7 targets per game, 93 yards. Had 10 targets in his return from injury. I think Green is straight up a better price-adjusted play, but they're both awesome, and I want at least one of them in my lineups. Usually, I'm sure I'll play a lot of May, so he'll be stacked a ton with May. Both of them will be. The wide receiver 3 is J.J. Jones. Had 7 targets himself, 4,600. Love adding him on as a cheap ancillary play in the offense. And then tight end is a bit of a rotation for them. So I don't think I'm going to play a lot of the tight ends, but you want to lock in on one. Kamari Morales, 26% of the routes. John Copenhaver, 33%. It's probably just a pass. But that is the slate. Conference Championship Saturday. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this slate. Hope it was a comprehensive breakdown. If you have questions, let me know. You can also reach out on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Kajeski. Hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel. That helps us a ton. So if you've done that, thank you. Otherwise, we're doing all the bowls. So stick around. We'll do a video for Army Navy too. We're going to have it all. Seasons may be over, regular season, but college football is not. We'll have it all for you. But until then, good luck. We'll see you next time.